all set up. We've got a tungsten tube, 1/4 inch tungsten tube on red liner, and we've got a piece of clear outer tube which will take the hook into the recess. And you'll notice that I've actually left a part of the small liner tube exposed at the front, and this is going to help with the taper of the fly. So I'm going to start off thread in the normal way, and I'm just going to build a little bit of thread up just so that I get a nice angle from the edge of my tungsten tube coming down to the lip that's on the inner tube. Hopefully now you can see that I've got that, and I can feel that I'm now able to take the thread up onto the tube itself. Cut off the waste. I'm going to put a few more turns of thread just at that point. Next stage, and people do it in different ways, I actually like to put the feelers on next, and I'm going to take 4 of those hackle stalks. And obviously we could take quite a bit of time doing this, but we're mainly tying this fly just to show you how versatile this Tubeworx system is. So I've got my 4 brown feelers. I'm just going to tie those in. I'm going to tie a couple of them with 2 turns of thread on the top, and I'm going to do the same on the bottom, and another couple of turns, and they're fairly loose wraps. I can now just separate those a little bit, sort of evenly spaced. So relatively happy with that, although I can adjust them a little bit later. I'm just going to hold all of them together, snip them off so that they're all the same length, and don't worry too much if they're looking in different angles. I've found that with using hackle stalks like this, they will just move and fish quite nicely. They won't spin the fly as some materials do. We're now going to take 2 white ones, prepared in the same way and just tied together, and I'm going to put 1 white one on one side, and I'm going to put the other one on the other side. Personally, I like to have the white ones a fraction longer than the brown, and I am actually going to bind them a little bit now. So that's our feelers for our shrimp imitation, and I'm going to trim the stalks off individually and at slightly different lengths, because again that's going to help with the taper in the body. Now a lot of people, when they're tying a Francis, use some form of hair. Calf tail is traditional, but a lot of the Icelandic guides now use pheasant tail, and I've been using pheasant tail, and I find it really good. It makes a great fly and looks fantastic in the water. So we're going to pull some fibres out 90 degrees to the quill, and we're going to take quite a bunch. So those of you who pay for pheasant tails, you might need to get in touch with somebody who shoots, because this will use quite a lot of pheasant. Couple of turns, and we're going to go the same again. Nice bunch, and each time make sure that you pull them at 90 degrees from the actual main quill of the feather. If you don't, you won't get an even end to the fly, and already you can see how much pheasant this uses up. But if it puts a salmon on the bank, then I'm more than happy to use up a whole tail in catching that salmon. And we're just gently coming around. I know a lot of people, and probably a lot of you watching this, tie tubes, use rotary vices, use tube fly vices. I suppose I've been tying for such a long time that I just still like my traditional vice rather than something that's rotary or similar. Just a few more fibres and I will have completed that section around the fly. So that's my ring of pheasant. So we've got all of this pheasant waste now, and again I'm going to trim that because I'm still looking for nice taper, so I'm trimming them with a taper, and we might not chop all off at once, might just niggle away at it, because if we can keep all of these ends slightly different lengths, then it will be a lot neater when we tie it down and we won't suddenly have the thread forming big lumps. And then we're going to just bind those ends, and as we're starting to get towards their slope, just check that we haven't got anything too long, and you'll already see this sort of classic shape of the Francis that normally people really struggle to build. That body shape, this carrot shape that everybody talks about, people struggle to build it up because we've come off the tungsten, and you can see we've already got this nice classic sort of tapering down towards the front of the fly, and that's essentially what we're looking for. We're looking for this really nice shape. So to our red wool, and this is ordinary red wool. This is obviously 4-ply because I've taken 2 away from the 4, and we're just going to tie that in. This is one of the only times that we're not tying our materials the full length of the tube, because we are trying to build bulk at one end. So we'll take that around, and then we're just going to put a couple of wraps of wool around at that point and tie it off. Now the great temptation at this point is to leave that on there, tie on the hackle and carry on with that wool, but if you actually cut the wool off at that point and divide the wool down again so we've just got single ply, it will be a little bit easier after we've done the hackle. So we've selected a nice red brown cock hackle, stripped some of the fibre off, and I want to make sure now that when I wind that hackle that I've got the good side or the shiny side of the hackle looking forward, so it naturally goes back, creating this shrimp shape. So I'm just going to tie the feather in at 45 degrees. I'm going to bend the stalk back a little bit just to secure it, and that's my hackle ready to go. Remove that little piece of waste, and then we're just going to wind our hackle, and we don't want a huge amount of hackle here. A couple of turns is going to be ample, and then we're going to tie that off. Using thumb and index finger, we're just going to move those fibres or sweep those fibres back and put a couple of turns of thread in front and remove the tip of our feather. So we're actually getting quite close to completing a fly that most people have struggled with, and what they struggle with is getting this taper. Well, this tube system has allowed us to get that taper, and we're just going to tie in that single strand of wool now. Remember, we've gone from using 2 strands on the first bit, we've now gone to a single strand, and this is Lagertan oval tinsel, or French embossed oval tinsel. And again, we're just going to catch that. Once again, because of the taper that we're trying to impart into this fly, we don't have to go and take all the materials right up to the eye. We're actually looking to get a taper going away. So now with the wool, and I'm trying to just flatten that wool out a little bit as I go, so making sure I'm passing it from hand to hand and flattening it in the process, and that again is helping with that taper right down to where we burred the tube down. A couple of turns to tie that off, and then we're going to take a nice rib, putting a little bit of pressure on it, and while I'm putting pressure on the rib, just to be on the safe side, I'm holding the tube because I don't want that tube to suddenly spin in the vise. So there's my little flash of rib. Couple of turns to come around. I can now remove the rib, and all that's left to do is to put a whip on the end of the tube. So I'm going to whip it once, twice, 3 whips, and run it up, and I'm just going to do the same again. 1, 2, 3, catch with the other finger and run it in, and there's our little carrot shaped Francis. Fantastic fly. Yes, it's sort of, lots of people think of the Francis, think of Iceland, but great fly all over the UK. We've got the natural taper into the body thanks to using this tube system and the way that we've used it, and we've got a really heavy little short Francis, but with that piece of tungsten in it, which is really going to get that fly into the fish really, really quickly. So there we have little Francis tube tied using a piece of tungsten and the Tubeworx system.